already that has started to emerge as a debating point. Whether or not to build another stadium and who will pay will distract us more than I prefer to be distracted. Whether or not to bond for other capital improvements. If you come over to the Capitol, you'll see we are finally fixing our leaky dome. There's only 3 marble domes in the world. Michelangelo did the one in St. Peter. They all leak. There's always an experiment on how to deal with it, and hopefully we found the solution now. But we, as stewards of the public property, have to take care of those things as well, and that is one of the ways that the state can quickly get people back to work. The area, I think, other than architects, the workforce that is most unemployed is people in the construction work and trades. And so if we're going to have to fix leaky roofs, now's a good time to do it. And so that'll be a debating point as well, because some are saying they don't think we should bond and incur additional debt. And then there's always the divisive social issues of guns, gynecology, and gangs. And those will be lifted up in ways that will make it challenging for those who want a respectful debate on those topics. So there's plenty of things to keep us busy, and there always is. There's usually about, over a 2-year period, about 4,000 bills introduced. There's a lot of issues, small and big, that people in the state want addressed, and there's a big competition for which ideas will get the public's attention. These are the ones that are going to grab the headlines and the blogosphere and the Twitter tweets, but there's going to be a whole lot of other stuff happening at the same time. And those probably won't get any press unless you subscribe to Session Weekly, which is the summary of everything that happens in the legislature, or my email update, and I'll pass out my newsletter to Chesaway. You can sign up for that.
That'd be a free subscription.
And it is free, and we are responsible stewards of the people's purse, so we do send it electronically unless you don't have email, and then we will send it to you by the old-fashioned post office. You won't get quite as fast. And I have always been a strong advocate for that, because there's lots of people who are still not connected. And when our Northeast Library was open, I'd always check in with Lois, the librarian, and ask her, so what's the average wait now on a weekday night for use of the internet? And during the school year, it would be 2 hours for a half hour. If it wasn't busy, they'd let you have an hour on the machine. I tell that to my peers because they think everybody has one in their bedroom and computer, and it's connected and it's Wi-Fi and it's up to date. And that's just not true. And there's a lot of older people who want to be active citizens who don't know how to get on the computer and are intimidated, even though there's learning opportunities. And so I'm glad that we still provide the old-fashioned mail when we can. But our biggest headache and our most important focus will be on the budget. We are facing a $6.2 billion deficit. Our overall budget for the general fund is about $34 billion. It's actually 16% of our general fund. And all of the easy cuts are gone. We have slashed billions over the last 4 to 6 years. And each one of those has been difficult because each one of those has a story of success. Generally, there aren't a whole lot of programs that, people just, we send out the money and people don't do anything. We have a legislative auditor, the state auditor, and a lot of other things that have checks and balances to make sure that doesn't happen. And they all were people who were served in one way or another by those resources. Or they were transfer payments to our schools and our cities and our counties to help them support services. I know many of you followed the budget debate at the city, and the loss of local government aid funding from the state was a cause of some of the budget challenges here in Minneapolis. And so all those issues, so it's not just affecting what state services are provided, but it's also what our local schools, our local city, and our county can provide to people who need resources. I was going to do a trivia quiz and ask people to answer, but now maybe some people would be embarrassed if they were really off. But just think, what do you think, about what you think is the biggest expenditure of our general fund dollars? Now, that's not the dedicated money. The dedicated money is like the gas tax is constitutionally dedicated to go to roads, and we have, the minor little sales tax increase that went to the legacy funding for clean water, arts, and culture. Those are dedicated funds, but Minnesota, more than even other states, uses a general fund to cover almost everything else. And so, think about what you think is our top expenditure, what you think would be second, how much you think we spend on environment, how much you think we spend on welfare.
We have a brave contestant.
Sorry.
The brave are always shy. Any ideas?
Snow removal.
We might have wished that was true, but that actually is a local service, so that would be in the property tax relief under I always say that I'm almost never ever tempted to think about moving to the suburbs, but there's after a few snowstorms when I think about it just briefly for the winter.
When you'd rather have roads and paths?
Yes.
No, that's just
But as you'll see from this, our number one biggest, and we don't have enough. Did they get around to everyone? Oh, this side needs some.
Where do they need to go?
Over here. I brought 30, so we might have enough if they just get around. Okay. Let's see.
Amy's got one too.
Okay. Great. Sorry about that. I thought we had 30. Yeah, Lynn.
Does the fact that K-12 education and health and human services are the largest budget, does that make them more of a target for cuts?
No, I actually think, and this is a Minnesota tradition, that we have tried to spare education. It is constitutionally one of our most important services. And so we have tried, and no matter who's in charge, to spare education from cuts. That's meant sometimes they didn't get cut, but they didn't get increases, which many can argue is a cut because you don't get more money to pay for your increased heating, fuel, costs, those sorts of things, the transportation costs of the buses. But it has been a bipartisan sort of priority to try and protect education. But you'll look at that, and education, just K through 12, if you hold that harmless, that's 40% of our budget. And if we have to cut 16% out of our budget, and if you're going to do it only through cuts, that means that everything else here is looking at closer to a 30% cut. And some of those things are also pretty darn hard to cut. The second biggest thing is health and human services, and if you look on the right in the bullet points, it actually breaks that down a little bit further. But that's primarily care for people with severe disabilities and seniors who have exhausted their resources and still have very big health care needs. They're either in nursing homes or they're getting home care services. And, at the cost of nursing home right now, $3,000 to $6,000 a month, depending upon your needs or more. Many people's life savings gets wiped out in the first few months, and they might have a few more months to go. And so then the state and the federal government, in a combined partnership with medical assistance, steps in. And so, are we going to pull the rug out from under people in those kind of circumstances? Some would say we already have. We have 5,000 people with developmental disabilities on a waiting list for waivered services. These are the services that help them live a more independent life. Many of them are staying in their parental home and their parents are getting aged, and they would like to be able to move them into a group home or some other transition point before it's a crisis. They're crossing their fingers that someday they'll get off that waiting list before a crisis happens, and some of them won't. And then the crisis team moves in and we find a place for them. But it's not a smooth transition. It's not very elegant. We have almost 1,000 people with traumatic brain injury who are on waiting lists for service. If you've ever known someone with traumatic brain injury, oftentimes they have very erratic emotions and behavior, and they can be very challenging and taxing for a loved one to take care of. And it's from falling on the ice, coming off the roof, being in a car accident. It can happen to any of us. And to be on a waiting list of unknown life while you're trying to figure out how your loved one can get back to some level of control and stability and forward progress is really frustrating. frustrating. So, I mean, we have cut billions. The easy stuff is gone. And so that's going to be really tough. The welfare programs, some people like to think we have to spend a lot. You'll see it's 0.3 cents. And those are the programs that provide people cash assistance when they've lost their job, they've exhausted their unemployment compensation. There's nothing left anywhere. The main welfare program that we have is for families with dependent children called Minnesota Family Investment Program. It has not had an increase in rates since 1989. People on these programs get $200 to about $500 a month, depending upon family size. And on top of that, they might get up to a couple $100 in food support, complements of the agricultural policies of our federal government. But trying to run a household on $700 or less and meet rent and other costs is pretty challenging. And so but there'll be discussion about whether or not we're too generous there. We have, because of federal reform, a 5-year limit, a lifetime limit, and that's tracked across strike lines and everything else. So, I mean, it's not a very generous program. Higher education, we've had double-digit increases in tuition over the last years. Students are graduating with sometimes as much as $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in debt, and that's not going into professional schools like lawyers and doctors. And you know, that's a house payment before you get started. And so, you know, it is really tough and daunting. I don't care who's in charge, I don't care who's the governor, to try and figure out how do we get to a balanced budget in 2 years, given where we're starting from. The other option is revenue. You know, you don't have to cut as much if you bring in new revenue to the table. And that will be an active debate, and it was an active debate in the governor's race. I believe we need a balanced solution. We need to bring new revenue to the table. We should do it in a progressive way. But we can't do it all in revenue. With the economy this tough, with this many people struggling, being out of work, being laid off, the amount of foreclosures that we've had has just been tragic. Our economy can't sustain, doing it all through revenue raising, and politically it just would never happen, given the balance of power. And so it's going to be tough. So the challenge I have to you is help me make wise choices.
Just as an illustration, I haven't figured out how to figure it out. To balance the budget on tax increase, has anybody done the number? What fractional increase? I don't think, I'm not saying politically it would happen,
16%.
but well, 60% of the budget, but we pay a range of taxes ranging from what, about the 8s into the 11s, the 10s?
If you just did it on income taxes, I haven't seen that model. No one has put it out there, I think. Governor Dayton proposed the most ambitious tax increases in a progressive way, going from households of $130,000 up, paying more. And even with his, which made people really blink, there's Democrats who wouldn't support the amount of increase that he did. It only raised about $2 billion out of the $6 billion we need. And for some people, it was, I think, a 30% increase. I don't know that you can go much farther than that. Now, there are other things you could do. I'm always glad to raise the cigarette tax. You haven't raised the alcohol tax in 20 years. It's been sort of protected. But, those are really minor revenues into the big stream. And we get most of our money from sales taxes and income taxes. We already have one of the highest sales taxes in the nation. But it's not when you look at combined local and state sales taxes, because in a lot of states they let local governments have local sales taxes. And so when you combine them together, we're kind of, maybe there's a little room to grow. We have always protected the basics. So your prescription drugs are not taxed, your heating fuels are not taxed, your food